Good morning and welcome everyone to the first session of our new Keep Up with Pryme webinar series. Today we're kicking things off with professional services. And before we dive in, and if we haven't met before, I am Laura Andradas, Marketing Lead at Pryme Global. And joining me is Aske Holst, Product Manager at Pryme Global. If you have any questions during the session, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we'll cover those at the end of the presentation. And now I hand it over to you, Aske. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So this is a bit of a new format, and the reason for this is our new release cycle. For the past few years, we had a release cycle of releasing apps on a monthly basis. There wasn't any major difference between one month or the other. We released features as soon as we had them ready. But as we are growing, we are creating more apps, we have more features. We decided that we needed a more structured approach. And so we looked at what the Microsoft team does with Business Central. They have 2 waves per year, the spring wave and the fall wave. And we wanted to do something similar so we can focus on 2 events a year, 4 events a year. And we decided on 4 events a year. And going to 2 events a year would be maybe too much of a difference from having 12 a year, but we decided to go somewhere in between, 4 events a year, where we will release a major version. And this is the plan for it. We will have major releases in November, February, May, and August. And in between those, we will have minor releases. The minor releases will be bug fixes. It could be small fit and finish. But there is also a space for if there is a specific requirement from a customer who needs a feature in order to go live or something else, we might be able to fit it into a minor. But we want to try to focus on delivering big features and breaking features only 4 times a year. Now, this applies to the Pryme apps. It doesn't fully apply to Progress's advanced projects yet. We hope to also get that on the same cycle as we are creating the roadmap for the future. But as for now, it is mostly for the Pryme apps. And so we're transitioning into this process. And currently we are in October and the next major release is scheduled for November. So really, we shouldn't be having this event now. We should be having this in November. But we thought it's been quite a while since we had a Keep Up with Pryme event. That was back in July, and a lot has happened since then. And we really want to show some of the things we have. So we are kind of sneaking this in a little bit early. I hope that's okay, but that's why we're here today. The other change is that we are switching from a one-size-fits-all Keep Up webinar to something that is focused on verticals. So this is one of the webinars we will be having. This is for professional service. And here we will be focusing on new features that are relevant to professional services. We won't cover any of the new features in our fund accounting. We will not be covering features that are relevant to law firms. This is purely for professional services. But if you have an interest in some of the other verticals, I recommend you join some of the other webinars. Of course, there will be overlaps between them, but we will have webinars for construction, law firms, accounting firms, and nonprofit in the coming weeks. There's a bit of a break due to directions EMEA, which will take a lot of people away. But after that, we will resume some of those webinars. So that is the plan. So what have we done since we last met in July? We've added a number of different features. Some of them are Progress's advanced project features. Some are in some of our Pryme apps. And this is part of the bigger picture. We don't want to present this as an app-by-app roadmap or what's new in each of the apps, because most companies use them together and they should be seen as a complete solution more than separate apps. Also, we are breaking some of the apps we already have up into smaller apps, and so it started to become too fragmented to talk about each of the different apps. And so we want to present it more as this is what we want to do in professional services from the life cycle of a professional services company point of view. We always talk about 4 steps in the life of a project: the setup, the plan, the work, and the invoice. And so we're trying to place these new features into one of these categories. So what we will be looking at today is within the setup area, new pricing for resources, also cross-expense markups. In the planning area, I'll not actually be showing anything. I'll just mention that we have a new app out, Pryme Project Work, which is for planning and tracking work that could absolutely be used in a professional services setting, but it is, at least for now, more tailored to construction and accounting firms. And so if you want to see a deep dive demo of that, you should join one of the construction or accounting webinars. In the work area, we will be looking on some of the new Pryme Time features that are coming or have come, time tracking on Teams calls, and our Copilot feature for completing timesheets. We will also be looking at reopening timesheets, which has an entirely new engine behind it when you reopen and make changes. And lastly, for the invoicing and payments part, we'll be looking at paying subcontractors. We have an entirely new app for paying subcontractors, and we will also be looking at a small new feature in Progressive's advanced projects, which is built to customer by task. And so that is the plan for today. Let's dive right into it. And so I will switch over to a demo environment. And what we will be looking at first is the new pricing for resources. Microsoft, quite some long time ago, delivered a new pricing engine, and it has been something they've been pushing. It is not yet mandatory, but it will become mandatory in the future. At the same time, we also had our own pricing engine when it comes to resources for projects in advanced projects. And while the pricing engine we have is really good for a lot of scenarios, there are definitely some scenarios it doesn't cover as well. And so we saw a need for some customers to maybe take advantage of some of the features that are in the Microsoft new sales price experience, as it is called. There are 2 prerequisites for using this, and they're both related to feature management. One of them is controlled in the general Business Central feature management, where there is a setting for the new sales price experience. And that needs to be active in order for this to work. It is currently set to be automatically enabled from BC 28, which is next spring. Activating this is a prerequisite. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will be using the new pricing for resources, but activating this will mean that you will be using the new prices for items. So there's a difference. We talked about the new pricing for item a long time ago. Now it's about resources. In order to activate it for resources, you will need to open up the feature management for progresses. And in the feature management for progresses, there is a setting for use new sales price experience for resources. It is currently not defaulted as being activated, but it will be activated as planned from version 29, which is in a year. I'm not sure if that actually applies. I think we might stick with the old engine quite a bit longer, just like Microsoft said they would switch everybody over to the new sales price experience within 2 years. It's now been 5 years and they haven't forced it yet. So let's see. But it does make a difference. So with this activated, what is the big difference? Well, if we look at resources and I open up a random resource here, if I look under the setup and Now I'm looking in the wrong place here. Should be the resource manager, sorry. If I look at sales prices, this is now not the Progressus sales price setup. And I can actually see here, I don't have any specific sales prices for this resource. Instead, I can look at the sales price list and the sales project prices. So this is nothing where we have added to it. This is the new Microsoft sales price experience, but you will need to use these sales prices to set the sales prices. And so I have a default price list here, which defines the price not by resource, but by resource group. And one of the ideas here is that you can set the price on the customer level. So I could define a price and say, for Trey Research, the group of consultants have a rate of 97. And now that is the price. So I can do per customer pricing. I can also do per customer price group, per campaign, contact, etc. Now there's some of these that do not apply when using projects. You cannot set a campaign on a project, etc. But you get some of those functionalities. So if you need pricing on customer level, this can be a solution. But beware, it's not a simple transition from one system to the other. It is not a one-to-one. We do not have all the features that exist in the Progressus resource pricing within the standard Microsoft pricing. Over time, we will try to extend, we will try to meet some of the same features, but there will be cases where it works differently. So I would say this is great for new projects, new implementations, switching a whole system from one to the other. I would be careful. It definitely needs a lot of testing in a sandbox because it will change how prices are set. So this is one side of it. And the other side is this also applies to the costing as well, which is a bit maybe not so obvious from the name new sales price experience, but it is actually also a purchase price experience in it. So it applies in the same way that you would also need to define the prices within price list, either on a project by project basis or on another basis that could be could be for specific projects or project task where you have special costing. But generally, costing is more general than pricing. A lot of possibilities in here, but be aware, it is not a straightforward transition from one to the other. There are features of Progressus Advanced Projects Pricing that does not exist in Microsoft pricing, and there are features of Microsoft Project Pricing that doesn't exist in Advanced Project Pricing. So two different solutions. The other part related to pricing is when it comes to expenses. In the past, if you had to set up expense prices, you were forced to do that on a specific group and project. Now you can set prices that are much more generic. You're allowed to say that it is for, you can leave a lot more blank in this list and say that we have a general markup of 10% on anything as a fallback. So you're much more free in defining that. You don't have to define it for every single different single code, etc. So there's a lot of possibilities in here in more generic pricing for expenses. For some companies, that makes it a lot easier to set up expense pricing when you have a generic markup that applies to everything. Moving over to the planning area. And maybe I should bring back the slide just to give you an idea of where we are. So moving into the planning area, this is where we have the new Pryme project work. Again, I'll not be showing this today, but do join the construction or the accounting webinars and see a demo of that. What we do in here is we create work items, we display them on a Kanban board, and we allow you to move them through different stages. So this is great for tracking minor pieces of work where you want to track the status, and it should be easy to track the time on. That could be development tasks, it could be accounting tasks, it could be marketing tasks, something where you have a task where you want to track the status and track the work on it. But it is not necessarily the same as using the resource planning where you're planning out the time specifically to a certain date or a certain time. It's more, we have this task to be done. It's assigned to somebody. How far are we? Are we sure it's getting done? We can add checklists, etc. Also, if you want to check out more of this on your own, there is an app source site for it. There's a QR code here for the project Pryme Subcontracting that you can have a look at. And sorry, the Pryme project work in this case. I will show this one again a little bit later. So let's move over to the work area. Within the area of work, we have some new features of Pryme Time. We have restructured the Pryme Time app to be multiple different versions, one for BC and one specifically for progressors. And now they share some of the features. One of the new features is time tracking on Teams calls, and the other one is a Copilot feature for completing timesheets. They have existed since April in the BC version. Now they're also available in the version for progressors. This one is a bit hard for me to show in a demo environment because it relies on live data. So I will show this with my real calendar in a real environment. This is my time tracking calendar. And the new feature in here is I can, of course, track my time with a start-stop timer or add something in saying I was in a meeting at this time, and I can move and adjust and track my time. I can do anything with it. I also have my Outlook calendar. We've had that for some time, so I can say, well, I had a meeting here, easier to just press the plus button and that adds in. But what we're also now showing are the Teams calls, which sometimes correlate very much with the Outlook calendar meetings. We can see here, I had a meeting from 10 to 11. The Teams call was started a minute early and ended 2 minutes late. Does that matter? No, it does not. But down here during my focus time, I can see I actually had Teams calls with individuals. These weren't scheduled calls. They were just spontaneous calls. And now suddenly I can add these on as well and have this as part of my time tracking. Also, this call was actually a bit shorter than the meeting. So maybe it's more fair to add it in with the actual time of the call. Great new feature here. Looking at features within time tracking and the time tracking calendar, we now have a new Copilot feature for completing my timesheet. And again, I will actually switch to a recording because this one is, again, hard to show in a demo environment. What it will do is it will look at all the time entries I've created. It will look at my calendar, my Teams, and also my emails, which means it's almost impossible to create realistic demo data for it. So I will cheat a little bit and show something. This was from a demo I did for the keynote at Directions in Las Vegas. So this has been shown on the big screen before. But what we are basically doing here is I have my time track calendar. I use the complete my timesheet Copilot. It collects data from each of the days from my calendar, my Teams, the Outlook details in general. So emails I sent, emails I received. it tries to find the gaps within that time I have tracked. So there are definitely some gaps in here, and see, is there something I did during the week that would fit in here? Often it would be emails. And so I get a suggestion. I can decide to keep it, and it puts in all the data about those small pieces of work where there is something that it can suggest for me. And you also get some information about the suggestion. So in this case, I have this tricky bug on a sales order, which is created from an email. And it also tells me why it suggested this. In this case, it said, well, there was a gap and there was an email sent. And so it estimated 18 minutes was used to compose this email. Is that true? Well, it's not that far off. Maybe it was 10 minutes, maybe it was 15, but it's close enough. And it's definitely something that I should have included on my timesheet. And we always mark them very clearly that these are AI generated. So you should review them before having them on your timesheet. Also, we do not allow you to start from zero and just say, create a whole timesheet for me. It will not generate data if you don't have something already tracked on that day. So this can be a great way of finding those small increments of time that you might otherwise forget, or they end up as just being, well, admin time, checking internal emails or whatever. It's a great way to find that last 5% of time. Next up, we have new features related to the timesheets. So timesheets in advanced projects always had the possibility of being reopened. But if a timesheet had already been posted, approved and posted, when we reopened it, we would have to reverse the entries generated. And then when you submitted and approved the new time, the updated timesheet, you would have to approve all of that timesheet, and that would create new entries, even if there are only a few entries changed. This has been re-architected to keep track of what the changes are and only give whatever is actually changed as input for approval. And that also means we only reverse the entries that needs to be reversed and only create new entries when needed. Let's look at it. So if I create a new timesheet here, and let me just do it for some random project, it doesn't really matter much. So I create something here and I create 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. Actually, so this is my timesheet and I submit that. Nothing is changed so far. I can submit my timesheet. It goes for timesheet approval. Somebody will have to look at that and say, yes, that looks perfectly fine. I'm good with that. Let's approve it. And when it is approved, we get project ledger entries. So we now have entries on that project. If we now later on realize that this wasn't right, I can go in and I can find my timesheet. I can reopen it again and I can make changes. So when I go in here and say, well, actually Tuesday was 7 hours and Wednesday was 9 hours, not that it maybe makes a big difference, but just to show it, it could also be that I added a new project or new task, whatever change, and submit it again. It will keep track of the days or the entries where there is a change. And so when I open up time approval, I now get only the changed entries for approval. Looking in here, we can see that I have one for 7 hours and one for 9 hours. These were both 8 hours before. And I can do approval, I can do rejection just as normal. But in the background, it then reverses the original entry, in this case of 8 hours, and creates a new one for 7. It reverses the other entry for 8 hours and creates a new one for 9. So this makes it a lot less intrusive when you have changes to your timesheets, especially if you already started invoicing, because in the past you might get new negative entries into the invoicing and positives, etc. This should be a much cleaner solution. Next up on the agenda is when we come to paying and invoicing. And this is where we have an entirely new app. We called it Pryme Project Subcontracting. And honestly, it's not the best name. We want to find a new name for it because it kind of leads you into thinking this is subcontracting as you would see it in construction. That is not the case. This is for professional services. It's made for professional services. It's made in collaboration with a number of professional services companies. It's simply a matter of when you have freelancers, subcontractors, some other company doing professional services for you, and you want to make sure that you can invoice for their work as soon as possible and they get paid as soon as possible. This is the solution. So we have a scenario where we want the subcontractor to submit the time to us as they work. That is a very common scenario in professional services. And that means that we can invoice for their work as soon as possible. And then we will get an invoice for them later. The alternative is that we have to wait for their invoice, which means that we might not be able to invoice for their services before we get invoiced for their services. And it's always better to be ahead of the curve and invoice for the services before you have to pay for them. So we want to streamline the process, and we do that by creating a subcontractor statement where we collect all the work that the subcontractor have done. And then you can go two different routes. You can either do self-billing, where you create a self-billing invoice for that subcontractor and pay them. That's possible in some countries. In the other scenario, you would send them a statement and say, this is the work you did for us. Please send us an invoice that matches that. If you're nice, you could also just expect them to send an invoice and then try to match it up, and then you can pay them out. So this is what I'll go to show you. So the scenario I have here is I have some different vendors and I have some resources. And on my list of resources, I have some subcontractor resources. I have Peter the subcontractor and Steve the subcontractor. And if we look at Peter the subcontractor, what is special about him is I have connected him to a subcontract vendor. In this case, the subcontract vendor is First Up Consultants. That's all I need to do. Then Peter will get access to the system. He will be able to do time sheets in the system. As an alternative, he could submit an Excel sheet with his time and we would import it into a time journal. It's either or. So let's create a timesheet for Peter here. So I'll track some time on a project. Let's say it's this project. It's a task, not maybe not client mean. Let's say he did some development and he did a number of hours on different days. And this is the timesheet that he submitted. Now, there might be an approval process. There might not be an approval process. I'm skipping the approval process in this case. But now Peter has submitted his time for the week he worked here. And he would go on and do that week by week. What we would do as either a project manager or as a finance operation would be opening the list of subcontractor statements and say, let's create subcontractor statements for the last period. In this case, I will create them for the month of September. And this will go through and find the different subcontractors where work has been performed. In this case, we can see that we have work for First Up Consultants and the subcontractor aptly named Subcontractor. I can open up this statement and I can track and can see what is the time. In this case, it was Steve that worked on a number of occasions doing specifications and development work. And it was to the total value of 1,504 and 55. Now, this is based on also the currency code of that subcontractor. I can change the currency code on this, of course, and then we will recalculate it into the currency of that subcontractor. But we don't need to do that ahead of time. And if the subcontractor had a different currency code, that would, of course, default in here. Then somebody needs to review this and say, is this okay? Maybe there's some of this that we don't want to pay for, especially if there was, for some reason, something not to be included. So I can delete lines from in here. I can also, if there are some lines missing, maybe I created a statement, there were changes made after I created the statement, I can get additional project ledger entries in here and add them to the statement. And with this, I can say this is now approved. And then the question is, what way do I want to go? Do I want to take the route of creating a self-billing invoice, or do I want to just wait for an invoice to be received? In my scenario, let's do a bit of both. I know that might not be realistic, but let's start with creating a self-billing invoice just to see what that looks like. And then it gives me a message here saying a self-billing agreement is required for this vendor. So in some countries, like the UK, you need to have a self-billing agreement in place in order to do self-billing. So this is a good block, and you can actually use it even in places where you don't just want to have self-billing at all. Just don't set a self-billing agreement end date on the vendor card. So we need to open up the vendor card for this vendor. And on this vendor card, we will need to set a self-billing agreement end date. And let's set that far into the future. Now we can have this as a date to track, meaning we can now create a self-billing invoice. So I've created this self-billing invoice. It is a general purchase invoice. It specifies the period, it specifies all the details. It of course has a total amount, and I can then pay this out to the subcontractor if I'm allowed to do that. But let's have a look at the other scenario. The other scenario is that we want to receive an invoice from our subcontractor. And in order to make it a little bit easier for them, we might actually print a statement for them detailing what we expect to have. So in this case, we have the statement 00005, and we say, this is what you tracked in our system. We would expect an invoice for 1,504.5 pounds. We can send that to them, and then we wait. And at some point, we will get an invoice. And luckily, I have already gotten an invoice from our subcontractor. And here it is. It says, Steve, for September, 1,500. Now, if this was received with a solution like AP Automation, we would ask that they added a reference to our statement number. So they should have added, in this case, S5. And by having this on the invoice, and especially if you use an AP automation solution that puts it into your reference number, this should feed into the details about the subcontract statement, which is here at the bottom, where it finds this statement in lookup. And of course, it'll only find it for that vendor. It cannot find it for somebody else. It also says that the match is a full match, but at the same time, it says the subcontract statement amount here is 1,504.5, and we got an invoice for 1,500. So it says, well, there's actually a bit of a difference. But we have a setup that allows for small differences. You can set up what the tolerance is, and that can be set up in the purchase and receivables setup. I've allowed up to 1% of difference. And here the subcontractor was nice. That just, well, 1,500 straight, that's okay. I don't need the last thing. And that means, yes, we can now post this invoice. If that had been a bigger difference, let's say they had said, maybe this was for 1,400, then of course it would not be a full match. It would be a partial match. And with a partial match, we cannot post the invoice. So we'll have to decide what to do. And maybe we just say, okay, fair enough. If you don't want to get paid more than 1,400, by all means, I will approve that and set it to be a full match. But then that's an active action by me. And then I can post the invoice. Also notice that I haven't put a project number or task number on the invoice. This is not a project invoice. We've already taken the cost on the project by the time that was entered and posted. So this is purely an accounts payable operation. And this is important. So with this, the invoice is posted. And if I look at my subcontractor statement, that statement is gone. Instead, it is now shown under closed subcontractor statements, where I can see I have this statement, which is the one I created for 1,504. It is now closed. I can still print it. I can show the entries, etc., but it's kind of done at this point. So this was the subcontractor flow. I really recommend you take a look at this app. There is a lot of time to be saved, a lot of frustration that goes away when you can have a process where you always match up the subcontractor invoices with the work they've actually performed. So that brings us almost to the end. There is a small little feature at the end here, the bill to customer by task, which I will show very quickly. It is originally a feature of Business Central, but it kind of interfered with all the other billing models we had on our projects. But now we have enabled it. So on a project, you can switch the billing model from one customer to multiple customers. If you do that, it is a one-way operation. You cannot go back again. But if you do this, you can set specific customers on each of the project tasks. So if I have this, I could go in and look at my task card, and on this card, I could set a specific customer and say, this is for another customer to pay. If you do this, you can no longer use the standard billing methods we have for progress billing and percent complete billing. It kind of says, okay, it's a billing model of its own. If you're going to use this, you cannot also use it with split billing, etc. It's a separate model, but for some scenarios, this can be a nice solution.